Having a chronic illness is like living in another world. I know better than most. Unspecified autoimmune disorder was my diagnosis. The words they used for, your body thinks it has to kill you. My immune system was the culprit. It targeted my digestive system, creating systematic inflammation that inhibited my ability to absorb nutrients. And, later, hampered my ability to eat solid food altogether. It melted my red blood cells, prompting monthly hospitalizations. It even interfered with my bone marrow in ways the doctors didn't understand. All of me hurt all of the time. I lived in a haze of exhaustion and agony. When you've been tired enough for long enough, you begin to lose your mind. You start to wish you were dead. At least, that's what I believed until the day I learned that I was almost dead. Stage 4, the doctor told me in a calm and gentle voice. It started in your stomach. I don't blame the doctors. It's hard to see tumors and lesions when your innards are already scarred and warped to pieces. She said I had 6 months at the most, and would be lucky to spend 3 of those in relative comfort. So I was shocked when, at her new appointment, she entered the room with a man I'd never seen before. "This is Dr. Ariman," she said. "He wants to discuss treatment options with you." Dr. Ariman smiled. He had light brown eyes that looked golden under the fluorescent lights. His thick auburn hair was too long to be entirely professional. I couldn't really tell his age. He had the kind of regally lined face that simultaneously looks 30 and 55. Against the cool, sterile white of the room, he looked almost cartoonishly bright. He told me his facility delivered experimental treatment, free of charge, to late-stage cancer sufferers.
"It's extremely radical treatment. It causes significant pain,"
he admitted.
"Unfortunately, one of our subjects died before we could start our treatment, so we have an empty bed."
The prospect of spending the brief remainder of my life in even more pain made me shudder. But under my doctor's shrewd stare and Oriman's thinly veiled eagerness, I couldn't bring myself to decline. "Can I have a few days to consider?" Disappointment settled over Oriman's face like a veil, but to his credit, it melted away swiftly.
"Of course."
I'd already decided to refuse. I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted, but subjecting myself to painful experiments wasn't it. I went for a drive that night. That time of year is bleakness incarnate. The cold blue sky framed stark black hills and bare, curling fingers of trees. It was miserably, flatly cold, with no hint of warmth in the air or land or sky. There was something hollow about it, something undeniably dead. I imagined myself just as dead and just as hollow as the last traces of embalming fluid leaked from my decomposing body and pooled in the stained silk lining of a cheap casket. Cold and dead and hollow and done. I pulled over by an ancient valley oak, gave into my despair, and wept. Great falls of branches threw spidery shadows through the windows. Then I called Dr. Ariman and told him I wanted the treatment. A week later, I was on a plane to Wyoming. Ariman's clinic was buried deep in the surrounding mountains. 2 torturous hours up a narrow, winding road sheeted in ice. The swiftly increasing elevation and vertigo-inducing views made me ill, so I covered my face and tried unsuccessfully to sleep. Finally, we reached a sleek, low-slung building. Despite the dry snow heaping down, only half the clinic was covered in drifts. The reason became clear the second I exited the car. Wind roared wildly, pushing everything, including me, in one direction. The driver rushed over and took my luggage. I followed him, bent against the raging wind. I felt like I'd never be warm again. Primal panic enveloped me briefly. I saw my own corpse again, this time buried in a powdery mountain of snow. The freezing temperatures would arrest decomposition. I would not be hollow, but I would be even colder and every bit as dead. I shuddered and forced my aching body to follow the driver into the building. The inside was as hot as the outside was cold, cloaked in heat so heavy it could have been a blanket. Everything was warm and white as snow, and 1,000 times hotter. Before I knew it, I was standing in a warm bedroom dominated by a huge squashy bed. Outside the reinforced window, snow continued to fall, a frozen curtain that wasn't quite thick enough to obscure the breathtaking peaks beyond. A knock startled me. An orderly entered a moment later. She had a wide, lipstick smile that gleamed in the lamplight. "I've brought you dinner." Sure enough, she held a tray with a frosty nutrition shake and a bowl of vegetable puree. "Your treatment starts tomorrow." She hesitated briefly. "You will see some odd, even disturbing things while you're here. Please remember, the situation is entirely under control." On that unpleasant note, she swept away. I was hungry, starving, but had long since learned that food usually isn't worth the pain it causes. I ignored the shake and paced anxiously. They'd taken my phone. The proposed treatment expressly forbade telephones and computers. And while it had seemed innocent at the time, I was worried now. But the flight and the drive had exhausted me. Despite my fear, I fell asleep quickly. I had a nightmare where I lay frozen and forgotten, unable to move or speak as shrieking wind spun great drifts of snow around my body. Nothing on this earth could have prepared me for my therapy. The therapy room was a gleaming white oblong. Windows dominated the western wall, revealing a blinding vista of glittering snow. Beds lined up directly opposite. Each bed had a large plexiglass cube at the side, along with a slender white machine and an IV stand drooping with bags of pale pink fluid. I saw Dr. Oriman immediately. Fire and gold, unpleasantly rich against the warm white. He stood up when he saw me, smiling widely. He grabbed both my bony shoulders and steered me to the farthest bed.
"It won't take as long as I thought,"
he said happily.
"We had a major success yesterday, a breakthrough."
He inserted an IV drip, then placed a large clear helmet over my head. It had a large port in the center and reminded me absurdly of a fishbowl. I waited nervously as he fit a spongy hose into the port and connected it to the cube. He surveyed his work, then patted my shoulder affectionately.
"Are you ready?"
I nodded. He connected the IV. I watched anxiously as the rosy liquid slowly disappeared into my vein. After a while, I realized my arm was burning. I grit my teeth and waited. This was nothing. I'd suffered through much worse. But the burning intensified swiftly, spreading and then gathering in my guts, my throat, and my armpits, where it deepened to outright agony. The world swam before my eyes. Sweat coated my body, clammy and cold, as if the fire coursing through my body was forcing it all out. Oriman watched me with the dedicated fervor of a fanatic. I tried to stay still. I tried to be good. But the pain finally reached a fever pitch and I could no longer tolerate it. "Sir!" I gasped. He took my hands.
"Almost. I know it hurts. I know.
Overwhelming pain suddenly erupted in my abdomen. He set a hand on my forehead, pressing me down against the pillow, but not before I caught a glimpse of my stomach, rising up and straining like a serpent was struggling to burst from my belly. Panic like I've never known coursed through me. Burning pain exploded like fireworks and spread like a rippling lake. I flailed and thrashed, struggling to catch a glimpse of my belly, waiting, just waiting for that roiling snake to explode from my guts. As if sensing my anticipation, it shot upward. It felt heavy, like molten iron sloshing at my rib cage. Then it crept underneath and slid forward. I began to choke. I was dimly aware of Oriman calling for help. My eyes watered. Breath wouldn't come. I felt things being crushed, felt tissues tearing apart, as this ghastly thing forced its way through my body. My own dead body filled my mind's eye again, hollow and frozen, discarded in the snow like a rabid hound. The suffocating pressure burst into my throat, and I blacked out. Oriman's smile greeted me when I surfaced again, pale gold and autumn russet. Not quite handsome, but somehow better than handsome. He sat me up. Aches exploded everywhere. I tried to swallow, but the bright, shocking pain brought tears to my eyes. I realized Oriman's lips were moving.
Look.
He kept whispering.
Look.
He pointed to the plexiglass cube. For some reason, it was dirty. No, full. Full of something small and frantic that bumbled and scratched at the walls. I frowned. It looked like an underdeveloped puppy, rounded yet curiously bony, coated in a fine layer of transparent white fur. Its head was misshapen, its deformed snout a mild horror. A single bloated, half-formed eye blinked slowly. It pressed blobby paws against the glass and uttered a shrill, gurgling whine.
She's premature. I overdosed you. She didn't have time to develop fully.
Did that come out of me?
Yes, in judging from your PET scan, there's a lot more where she came from.
I felt dizzy and sick, far worse than I had when I'd seen my stomach bubble and swell. What's going on? I have cancer, not mutant parasitic puppies.
That is cancer.
He sighed, then took my hand again.
I could stay, if they wanted. They can even go back inside you. I've forced them back into bodies before. But they don't want that. They want out. They all want out. That's all they are. Life forms, poised on the verge of evolution. Not quite developed enough to be. We give them form.
He patted the IV.
We let them out, and we let them be.
Oriman claimed that some illnesses, especially advanced illnesses, the kind that metastasize and feed on you, are another form of life. Conscious, trapped beings that simply want to live, but don't quite know how. Oriman found a way to give them independent life, and in the process, help the host. Hope stirred for the first time, tempered by disgust as I watched the deformed puppy squirm. I didn't know what to say or think. Apparently sensing this, he patted my shoulder again.
Rest. We'll speak more later.
He left the cancer puppy with me. I watched, stomach roiling, as it scratched the cube and cried. It's okay, I soothed. It turned toward me pathetically, bloated eye swimming in its socket. As I stared back, a realization dawned. Though I felt nauseous and lightheaded, though my stomach still hurt, I realized something. I felt 100 times better than I had that morning. Oriman eventually extracted 7 puppies. None of them looked right. Slender and squirmy, with whiskery white fur and misshapen snouts. But they were energetic, excited, and clingy. So clingy, in fact, that they sent up a shrill, gobbling chorus of pure misery the moment I moved out of sight. At Oriman's request, I began to sleep in the nursery. I wasn't allowed to touch them. They remained trapped in their cubes. But no matter. My presence was enough to settle them. I wasn't the only patient, though I quickly became Oriman's favorite. Each extraction imbued me with a wave of energy and vitality. I was returning to the correct world, the one where I could run and breathe and eat. The sickly, half-decayed smell I'd learned to live with slowly disappeared. Color returned to my face, and now that I felt well enough to use Oriman's gym, muscle began to fill out the soft, unwell skin that coated my bones. I thought I would soon be cured, and then I had a flare-up. In all the excitement of extracting the cancer, or rather, breathing life and giving motivation to what had been cancer. I'd forgotten all about my other sicknesses. My blood-melting, gut-destroying, joint-eating sickness. The crash was quietly magnificent in its totality. I was crooning at the pups. I learned to love them somehow. In the middle of the lullaby, dizziness swept over me. All at once, strength seemed to drain from me. Darkness and disorientation continued to spill over me like a tide. The last thing I noticed was pain, a cold steamroller crushing everything below my belly button. I slid to the floor, dimly aware of the warm tile under my skin, and faded. I woke to pain I can't describe, beyond expression, beyond comprehension, beyond the limits of my body. Oriman's face swam into view, no longer kind or excited, but frantic, barking orders at unseen nurses. Sweat escaped his surgeon cap, dripping down his forehead and under his mask. I choked and convulsed. This wasn't a lump, no roiling little pup. This was a spider, enormous and fat, forcing my limbs to move against my will as it writhed inside of me. It was everywhere. It was everything. It was me.
More. Now!
We can't! A nurse snapped. She'll die!
She's already dying.
He reached for the IV. The burning sensation immediately increased, painful and miserable, but lost, buried under the spectacular torture of whatever monstrous entity was pulling itself out of my body. I felt the familiar sensation of pressure, but 1,000 times worse than it had ever been. It felt like enormous spider legs crawling up my esophagus. Shadows licked at my periphery like black flames. I knew I was fading. This was it. The depth and force and violence of its pain was killing me. I felt a flare of bitter disappointment, just as something pale and monstrous erupted from my mouth. Then I fainted. The next thing I knew, I was terribly warm, coated in sunlight and fire, of molten gold and boiling honey. Finally, I opened my eyes. Oriman sat at the foot of the bed. He looked ill, still bright, but lifeless, like an old fluorescent light. He tried to smile. The result was ghastly. "What happened?" I croaked. The words sent spasms of pain down my throat and into my chest.
Your other illness. I'm sorry. I didn't know it wanted to be alive.
He swept a hand through his dark red hair.
You know, the others, the pups, they just feed. They don't know any better. They don't know anything but the drive to consume.
"What happened?" I repeated. Oriman's face crumpled strangely.
Come, see.
He guided me into the silent hall. The lights were off, the doors all shut. Trepidation increased with every clumsy step, building steadily to a panic. "Where is everyone?"
On lockdown.
Oriman took me to a small, heavily damaged door I'd never noticed before. The steel bulged and cracked in several places. A metal plate covered the small, reinforced window. He flicked the plate to the side with a shutter.
Look.
For a moment, I was sure I was going to cry. Then I stepped forward and peered through the window. Something white hurtled out of the darkness and slammed into the glass. I drew back in a panic and found myself staring at a long, wraith-like face. Small yellow eyes gleamed deep in its head. It had no nose, just a flat expanse of puffy flesh. Thick black webbing circled its vertical mouth and fluttered dreamily.
It tried to climb back inside you.
Oriman murmured.
We stopped it, but it killed 2 of my nurses and another patient.
It placed 2 hands against the window, long and fleshy, patterned with deep, pulsating holes.
It doesn't want to feed. It wants to kill. It likes to kill.
The monster darted out of sight. A second later, a deafening crash made the door rattle.
It's broken out of 4 rooms. It killed 5 people. It doesn't burn, it doesn't freeze, it doesn't bleed. It heals itself. It's indestructible
Oriman licked his lips.
when it escapes.
Another floor-shaking crash followed by a new bulge appeared in the door.
I am sorry. I have to put it back inside of you.
Having a chronic illness is like living in another world. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you behave. It changes what you want. And it changes what you are. I picked up my IV pole and struck Oriman across the nose, rupturing one of his eyes. I half expected him to bleed gold. But no, just red. Thick and unwholesomely vibrant red. I left him there, ignoring the insistent slamming of my illness, and laughed. Not at him, but at my lack of pain and boundless energy. I felt alive, as far from a hollow, cold corpse as is possible to be. I gathered my things, stole the keys to a company car, and fled. I know my illness is a monster. I know it's already escaped. I should have let it crawl back inside me. That would have been the right thing to do. But after being so sick for so long, being well is just like another world. I can't let it kill me anymore.